We know the hateful attacks we're seeing on Jewish students at college campuses is not occurring in a vacuum. Can you help us take a step back and explain the financing, including the role of 501c3s and 501c4s here in the U.S. that generate resources that are used in some cases to support outright terrorist groups like Hamas from within the U.S.?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The cases that I discussed in my testimony, both spoken and written, address 3 charities that have been exploited by Hamas here in this country. It was quite an effort to track them down back in the 2000s. My concern right now is that America's focus has shifted over the last decade or so. First it was ISIS, then it was Russia, then it was China. My concern right now is that we've taken our eye off the ball. I am not aware of significant efforts within the U.S. government to track Hamas over the last 10 years. Yes, over the last month, we have seen a significant uptick, and justifiably so. My fear, though, is that we've had 10 years of just a blind spot as it relates to Hamas, perhaps other groups as well. As you know, the U.S. government has pivoted away from what used to be known as the global war on terror, as we've now shifted into what we now describe as great power competition. It's my belief, my strong belief, that we need to learn how to walk and chew gum here. We're going to continue to see terrorist attacks against the United States and our allies. Unfortunately, I think this is just a reality. We need to make sure that we have the resources within the bureaucracy to tackle these problems while addressing the threats of Russia and China and others.
Ms. Tishby, as you know, the disgusting show of support for the terrorist goals of Hamas are appearing on college campuses, including the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," being displayed on a building at the University of Pennsylvania. As someone who has been an advocate for Israel, focused on expanding other people's knowledge of your country, can you speak to how these displays of support for Hamas go beyond just some harmless college campus activism?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the question. So we can definitely see how when you support a massacre that occurred in Israel, you will encourage violence in the United States. That goes without saying, and it's a dog whistle to their supporters. We have seen the attacks on college students and beyond. There was a kid in Tulane University that was hospitalized with broken bones for supporting Israel, being in a rally, in a pro-Israel rally. There was Paul Kessler from Los Angeles was killed for holding an Israeli flag. So there is incitement for violence that is immediately preceded by violence, and we see this in the uptake in anti-Semitic attacks and rhetoric. We see this online and offline. There is no question that these two things are directly related and connected.
Thank you. I now recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Neal, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As an academic, I want to thank Ms. Dror for being here today. I know how difficult this is for students to step forward, and I know the strength that has brought you here today, and we're indeed grateful for your testimony. Let me move to you, Mr. Greenblatt. How does the ADL, which is well regarded and always has been, believe that administrators, faculty, community members can more effectively respond to hateful speech, including anti-Semitic and indeed hostile speech on campus?
Thank you for your question, Congressman Neal. I think there are a few things to consider, and I would say right off the bat that the ADL has been fighting for civil rights for 110 years. We are ferocious advocates for the First Amendment. But as I noted earlier, freedom of speech is not the freedom to slander people, right? Freedom to talk about ideas is not the freedom to threaten people based on their identity. But there are steps we could see university administrators take. So number one, they should speak up forcefully and condemn anti-Semitism without any equivocation, without any qualification. So Talia kind of alluded to this. It should be simple and straightforward to say anti-Semitism is wrong, period, and not encumber it with other issues. Number two, rigorously enforce disciplinary rules. The issues that I mentioned and others rarely have students been penalized. And so it creates an environment where people feel like they can operate with impunity. But if you break the rules, there should be consequences. Look, and I'll be clear, I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't believe in canceling people for every imagined microaggression, for mislabeling someone. But I do believe in consequence culture. And if you issue death threats to a student, guess what? There'll be a knock on your door from the FBI, you will be arrested, and you should be expelled. That should not be so hard. Now, we have seen some administrators step up. Today, GW announced they were suspending the SJP chapter for violating the conduct code at GW. It happened last week at Columbia University. At Brandeis, they actually expelled them. But I don't think there should be a place on any campus for organizations like SJP that threaten people based on their ethnicity or faith or nationality. Thirdly, investigate these groups and try to understand where's the funding coming from. Try to make sense of how are they getting their resources. And finally, we think all of these universities should set up task forces to come up with plans to tackle this issue. We talked, the University of Pennsylvania was just mentioned by the chairman. The response there has been lacking for months. Harvard University dragged its feet. Columbia the same, and I could go on and on. Task forces with short timelines to come up with a plan is long overdue.
And let me say as well, with the ADL has a long history of condemning violations of everybody's civil rights.
Correct.
We're indeed grateful for your testimony today and the plan that you've outlined. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Greenblatt.
Mr. Smith is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses, certainly the entire committee here. These are important issues that we address. And today's hearing brings together two very important items of bipartisan interest on this committee: anti-Semitism and the tax status of college endowments. While we may not agree on every detail, I believe there is strong bipartisan support for ensuring the federal tax benefits provided to the nonprofit education sector are utilized for their intended purposes. That doesn't sound unreasonable, but ensuring access to the education and training needed for every American to be career ready. We did some important work to that end in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and I know some of my friends on the other side of the dais have ideas to address that issue as well. One important aspect of this is ensuring educational institutions utilizing these tax benefits are both respecting true academic freedom while also ensuring all students have a safe learning environment. Not unreasonable. As we have unfortunately seen on campuses across the country, as some recent protests have quickly turned to intimidation, harassment, threats, and violence, some universities have cited the First Amendment to explain their inaction. This is interesting given that for years, universities have failed to protect the free speech rights of students unless they approve of the speech. These universities practice a policy of preferred speech, as mentioned before, not free speech. And of course, the threats of violence and intimidation we have seen on campuses of late is not protected speech. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, as mentioned earlier, is known as FIRE, F-I-R-E, has helped to explain the difference. Quote, violence is never protected by the First Amendment, end quote. Another quote, physically confining students within a given space is likewise unlawful. Another quote, just as violence is unprotected, so too are true threats and intimidation, end quote. The failure of some universities to distinguish between protected speech and unlawful conduct is truly disappointing. As the chairman noted, this is a leading reason so many colleges and universities have received horrible ratings from the foundation called FIRE when it comes to free speech. Question. Mr. Lehman, you said in your written testimony, I understand, quote, I understand the needs and protections for academic freedom and free speech, but those freedoms are not a license to create an environment of harassment, bullying, and threats for Jewish students or for any students. So my question is, can you give us a tangible, perhaps, description of what a university's responsibility is to keep their students safe from activity that clearly goes beyond what some are saying is free speech?
Thank you, Congressman Smith. And I think we have to continue to go back to this very clear distinction. Free speech, academic freedom on the one side cannot, should not, and never should be allowed to enable targeted harassment, inciting violence, and other forms of intimidation that are directed at individual students. And that is exactly what is happening in the examples that you've heard. One area that we have really not talked a lot about, but I think helps to create this very pervasive environment of hostility and intimidation, is in the classroom itself. During this period of 5 weeks at Stanford, we had a professor in a class herd Jewish students into the corner of the classroom without their belongings and say, this is what it feels like to be a Palestinian. That's what is happening in the classroom. Or other faculty who are, as they go on their diatribes against, in their words, the evil settler colonial state of Israel, then saying to their students, by the way, if you go to that Students for Justice in Palestine rally, I will give you extra credit. And if you don't, you'll basically get a demerit. So this is a broad-based cultural issue on campuses. It's obviously broken in terms of this aspect of campus culture. And in terms of what can be done, you've heard a lot of great ideas, but fundamentally, we need administrators to actually take disciplinary action. And I'm sorry to say it, but too often our universities are acting in equivocating ways and not being firm. Just go ahead and terminate that faculty member when they cross the line. Go ahead and expel that student when they harass or, even worse, assault another student. If we get the disciplinary action, I can tell you at Hillel, we continue to actually work the other side of this equation. And thankfully, we do have many campus colleagues, administrators, who are working with us on educating their staff on anti-Semitism and beyond. But bottom line, we need action, and that's what we're looking for.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Doggett is recognized.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for the moving testimony that each of you have presented. The activities and the incidents that you describe are totally unacceptable and alarming. People who failed to unequivocally condemn the Hamas atrocities immediately just don't have much credibility with me personally. Mr. Lehman, I appreciate these 3 specific recommendations you made, all of which seem to be reasonable. I know Mr. Greenblatt referred to the security grants, which have been helpful to a number of places in my community. In Austin, the only city I've ever called home, ADL has been a force for good for decades, and I know you've worked to combat the very kind of prejudice and hate that has been the focus here today, whether it was directed at Jews or any other segment of the community. A couple of years ago, sadly, in my community, we had a spate of anti-Semitic events. A banner hung from a highway, some leaflets and crude flyers, and it all culminated in a young man who set fire to Temple Beth Israel in our community. It was alarming because we take pride on tolerance and diversity in our community. But one of the most moving and hopeful events after that was when a group of women, including many ADL members, Jewish women, organized a rally for kindness at the state capitol that I attended. And perhaps the most moving part of that event was a Muslim imam who stepped forward to present a check to the rabbi of Temple Beth, even though Muslims had nothing to do with the event, and offer support and recognition of the importance of all faiths working together. I thought of that incident the other night as I was watching cable television and saw Rabbi Mark Schneider and Imam Shamsi Ali discussing the tragic situation we find ourselves in today. The Imam said that for me, anti-Semitism is my fight, as he, referring to the rabbi, has taken Islamophobia for his fight. You know, we advance our common humanity that despite our differences, we have even more in common. We deserve dignity, we deserve respect, we deserve peace and reconciliation, and I think the war is shared by each and every one of us. And the rabbi responded by noting that they were going to every city of university in New York, in each borough, to spread the same message. Protest, demonstrate, do whatever you want, but don't cross the line. And it seems to me that's where we need to be moving, to try to overcome the anger and the grief, to recognize that Islamophobia is just as wrong as anti-Semitism, to recognize that it cheapens and weakens efforts to unite us against anti-Semitism when that term anti-Semitism is wielded as a political weapon. Criticism of Israel, very harsh criticism of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, is not any more anti-Semitic than the voices of thousands of Israelis who were filling the streets of Jerusalem protesting Netanyahu before October 7th. And support for Israel has always been strongest in this country when it is genuinely bipartisan. While deplorable anti-Semitic activities have been on the rise, certainly, there have also been troubling acts and hate speech against Muslim students across the country, as reported in university newspapers. Particularly vulnerable have been Muslim women who choose to wear the hijab. At the University of Texas in Austin, the disruption of a Palestinian meeting. At Yale, a Death to Palestine sign. Here at American University, a death threat to a Palestinian university employee. At Stanford, a hit and run is being investigated as a hate crime against a Muslim. I think the pain and the grief and the anger of many who've seen children murdered by Hamas is not really very dissimilar from the anger that I'm hearing from those who see children killed in Gaza. Doesn't mean they're equal. It means the hurt is the same. And the inability to feel the pain of the other because the pain is so very deep for that individual. We need more rabbis and imams and people of more faith, of all faiths, that are working together to try to heal the divide. And I salute your efforts to contribute to us today, not only about anti-Semitism, but this need to heal as we move forward. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. It wasn't too long ago, in fact, it was October of 2018, in the neighborhood where my mother grew up, was a horrific killing at the Tree of Life. 11 were killed and 6 were wounded. Squirrel Hill. Now, it was hard for me to believe that my mother growing up in that neighborhood and being one of the 9 members of the McTighe family would ever be in a neighborhood where people have fostered hate. But yet we keep seeing this go on and on and on and on. And while we have these nice paragraphs of what it is that we talk about and where it is that we think it needs to end, it finishes up with the final paragraph. I can't imagine what it's like for all of you to sit here today and have to defend your faith. Not in some far-off land, but right in America, where these are the very things we champion. And when we talk about ivory towers, the University of Pennsylvania, quite honestly, would be glad to tell you how great they are. They will tell you how welcoming they are and how they're the greatest educational institution there is. However, the University of Pennsylvania had a poetry festival. It hosted a rose gallery of speakers who expressed unambiguous anti-Semitism and hostility towards the Jewish people. All this was hosted on the weekend of the holiest day in Judaism, Yom Kippur. Now, if somebody tells me this is just a coincidence, and we sit here and we talk about it and we talk about it and we condone it by our inactivity towards it, in our condemnation of it. Look, I'm from an Irish background. When the Irish came here, they looked at windows to try and get a job and said, Irish need not apply. Each one of our peoples have gone through something at some time or another. But the Jewish people, it is endless. It never stops. We have people in the highest patches of education opening their doors to this type of behavior and saying, no, you must understand. We need to hear both sides of this until it is that we put our fingers in our ears and close our eyes to what happens to the Jewish people and open our hearts and minds and wallets and give access to our universities and championed by the very professors who teach our children. And these are the people who we want our kids to follow. These are the people of higher education These are the people who stand above those who don't have the same education, and yet this is what they sponsor? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I can't imagine, Mr. Orr, what you have gone through. I can't imagine what you go through time after time after time, and people keep telling we need to do something about it. Well, it's far past the time to do something about it and actually do something about it. Why would we continue to fund these universities with taxpayer dollars? Why? Mr. Lehman, if you can help me to understand this, because it is beyond anything I can grasp anymore, because I wasn't raised this way. What in the heck is wrong with these people? And I don't, listen, I'm never going to stand up and say, well, you know, Hamas, they have a reason to be like this. Bull. They have no reason to do what they did on October 7th. They have no reason to do what they continue to do to the Jewish people. And for us to stand back and say, well, we should probably cut funding to them, we should probably try to act in some way. I am tired of a United States that sits and watches what happens and condemns it, but doesn't do anything with its actions. Action speaks harder than words. Tell me, sir, what do you think we should be able to do? And especially, this is a tax writing policy center, right? Why do we continue to fund these people?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Kelly. And my wife grew up a mile from the Tree of Life Synagogue. She and I were married a mile from the Tree of Life Synagogue. We feel the pain of that community, and we do not want to see, as you said, that replicated, God forbid, on a college campus. And if we don't act, if we don't collectively find a way, as you said, to heal these communities, to eradicate the hate that we're allowing to fester, we will see it. So I know I only have a few seconds to respond here, but bottom line, and it's not dissimilar from what Mr. Doggett said as well, all hate is a problem, but we should not turn a blind eye to the fact that we have sanctioned and universities have sanctioned allowing this very specific form of hate against Israel, a demonization that goes beyond anything one can imagine unless you're sitting on campus listening to it day in and day out, and a hate that says when you're Jewish, it's okay to have this kind of discrimination pointed your way. We can do better. Some of us are working very hard, and you all, we gave recommendations. If you stand behind those, whether it's tax-based, Title VI, by the way, it's a huge way to drive accountability. Universities feel that pain. So these are the steps we need to take. And again, I thank you for your passion.